Let's talk about the very talented author and philosopher Malcolm Gladwell. This is the guy that wrote a book about that theory that you need to do something for 10,000 hours before you become proficient at it. He also wrote The Tipping Point, and he's the person that coined that phrase, the tipping point. He's quite the cultural iconoclast, isn't he? I'm a huge fan of his, actually. And he has said cancel culture is rife because a whole generation has been raised without the Christian ethic of forgiveness.
Exactly. Now, I know many of your listeners might be thinking, oh, here we go, Mark's got the God Squad on tonight. What a treat. But hear us out. I've actually
You're a lay
said this...
preacher, aren't you, by the way?
Oh, no, not quite, thank goodness. But I mean, I've actually said this on your Drive Time show before, Mark. I'm an Anglican. I don't know how I still am, to be honest. I'm a Christian. I go to church. I consider myself to be a member of the Church of England. And we Anglicans were the biggest Leave voting bloc in the country. Not many people know that, but you wouldn't, of course, if you just listened exclusively to bishops and archbishops of the church. But putting all that to one side, I think there's something to be said for the idea that we're all forgiving sinners, which is something that we used to believe as a nation across the board. And the idea that we let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And you sort of remember that our shared humanity by consuming, rich or poor, one and all, the blood and indeed the body of Christ, those fundamental parts, key tenets of the Christian faith. Now, it was easier back then, I think, to remember that we all make mistakes, that in life there are Judases just as much as there are Johns. But I think in the not too distant future, there's going to be a real crisis of confidence in what we've replaced Christianity with. The sort of religions of woke, the religions of cancel culture, the religions of green, the religions of, I don't know, even the NHS to a certain extent has become a sort of the church of the nation.
And identity politics, of course.
Absolutely. And it's become a sort of competition. Our culture's become a competition of likes and retweets. And don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of that myself. Instead of sharing together a sort of community and moral values in which you can, I don't know, order a hookup as easily as you can a Chinese takeaway in today's day and age. But all of these things, I read his article, the article in the Times, and it rang true with me. I did actually read it and think, you know, I do recognize that. And I do think in the future, you know, we're going to look back and think, oh, goodness gracious me, we have lost an awful lot.
You can order a hookup as easily as a Chinese takeaway. You'll have to explain that one to me after the show, perhaps. Darren, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think this is unique and exclusive to Christianity. I think most of the world's great faiths profess the idea that we are insignificant, that we are temporary, that we're humble, that there is a higher power. So whether it's Judaism or Islam or Christianity or any number of other ethical codes, it's all about, you know, thinking about other people and being humble and forgiving. So you could argue that what we're missing, therefore, is across the board spirituality.
Yeah, no, I think so. Well, it depends what you mean by spirituality, right? Because I guess many of them would argue that they're incredibly spiritual when they, I don't know, bring out the incense burners whenever they hear Mark Dolan or Darren Grimes on the telly. But, you know, this, I think you're absolutely right. There have been so many occasions where I see things online from people just jumping to conclusions about what something is said. And actually, 9 times out of 10, Mark, whenever I've had someone say something about me online, whenever I have asked them to repeat that or do they want to discuss that in person, the person is rarely ever willing to actually engage with you or have that conversation in person or say something, repeat something that they've said online. And I think this sort of medium of the internet has meant that we feel removed from those who we are tweeting or talking about online and forget that we are all at the end of the day humans. And I think that works on both the left and the right. I think we're all guilty of it. So I'm always willing to listen to those, I think, especially eminent authors who want to sort of bring us back to remembering those laudable aims and values.
A regular guest on the show is the comedian Nick Dixon, who is a practicing Christian, Darren. And he said that he's concerned, actually. He feels that the leadership of his church is actually now also dominated by a woke ideology. Is that a concern of yours?
Yeah, it is a concern of mine. It absolutely is, and it brings us on to the next story, actually. But
Yeah.
Talking about the sort of statue reviews, talking about diversity quotas, talking about all these things. Diversity quotas. Mark, before long, there won't be anyone left in the Church of England. Never mind diversity quotas. We've got to get bums on seats. Never mind sort of, I don't know, a rainbow coalition in the Church of England. Yeah. This stuff is absolutely farcical. It's utterly cartoon. So, yes, I would agree wholeheartedly that this sort of the upper echelons of the church have got their priorities well and truly wrong. And especially during I've said this to you before, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, when people have needed spiritual guidance and direction as we all go doolally by being locked away indoors for nigh on 12 months. We've needed our spiritual leaders. We've needed our national church. And I'm afraid they've been left with sorely wanting.
Well, yeah, to speak up on the impact of lockdowns.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more.
No
but
opposition.
Of course, anyone that argues against that, Mark, is a denier. We are bad people. We are selfish. We hate granny. You know, that's the sort of stuff that we're met with. Yeah. That's the sort of
I think locking people up for a year and throwing away the key is hardly a Christian thing to do, but that's Absolutely. Just my opinion.